Grace and peace to you in the name of God the Creator, Christ the Redeemer, and the Spirit who sustains us. Amen. One of my favorite TV shows is Somebody Feed Phil on Netflix. It stars Phil Rosenthal, the producer of the sitcom Everybody Loves Raymond, traveling around to different cities or regions all over the world to sample the cuisine and become immersed in the culture, whether it's the Las Vegas that the locals know, or the Basque region of Spain, Mumbai, or the Mississippi Delta. He's game for anything, even if he's sometimes hesitant or suspicious of whether he'll actually like it or whether he'll survive eating it. But despite the anxiety that sometimes peeks through, he almost always finds that he likes the food and the people. Even though Paul didn't travel with a production crew, something about Phil's travels around the world each season reminds me of Paul's journey around the Mediterranean world. He would travel to a location and immerse himself in the local culture, meeting people and building relationships with them. And even though he sometimes finds himself out of his element, or even distressed, as he does at the beginning of our preaching text for today, Paul somehow manages to center himself, to ground himself, and to remain a non-anxious presence for those he encounters. The Athens that Paul finds as he waits for Silas and Timothy to catch up with him is quite the city. Ancient Greeks and Romans believed that the world belonged to the gods, and inevitably, often without realizing it, humans would trespass against them in some way. And so the core of Greek and Roman religion was to maintain or restore peace with the gods through rituals and gift-giving. Athenians were known as being the most pious of all the Greeks, and so in the public spaces, Paul would have seen temples and shrines everywhere he looked, one after the next after the next. He's distressed by how much time and money the Athenians are spending trying to get the gods to show favor to them. The writer of Acts drops other hints at the culture of Athens that it's important to flesh out a little bit so we really understand what Paul's walking into as he prepares to interact with the Gentiles in the city. The Athenian elite of the day were intellectually curious, but very much removed from the everyday reality of life. They gathered daily to exchange and debate new ideas. Two schools of philosophy are presented. The Epicureans denied that such a thing as divine providence or judgment existed, that there was any kind of life after death, either in something resembling a heaven or a hell. For Epicureans, the highest goal of life was pleasure, and the highest pleasure was the absence of pain and suffering. The Stoics, on the other hand, believed that knowledge would lead to virtue, that reason was the guiding principle of nature, and that humans should seek self-sufficiency in obedience to reason. The Stoics believed that virtue was the highest goal of life, to be achieved through emotional self-control. Passions and insecurities were seen as weaknesses. These two philosophies represent a range of Greek thinking about a variety of things, such as whether the gods are accessible to humanity, what kind of existential purpose the universe has, and even whether our souls survive when we die. But despite these fundamental differences, they share one commonality. They are all willing to engage with Paul because he's presenting to them a new idea that they have never heard before. And for all of them, Epicurean and Stoic alike, that's a fundamental tenet of their society. When Paul starts to talk, some of them have no idea what he's talking about. He doesn't make any sense to them, and they think he's just a dabbler in the art of philosophy. But others are intrigued and invite him to come and present his ideas before the Council of Areopagus, the body that's responsible for the governance of the city and determining what public instruction will be offered. By this time, Paul has been living and working in Macedonia long enough to absorb something of the culture, and he's probably even been in Athens long enough to begin to get a sense of the patterns of life. He knows what Athenians value, at least in their public and religious lives. In his role as apostle, one who is sent, he is an evangelist, one who shares the good news, a preacher of the gospel, but he is not sent to proselytize, to convert or recruit people to the faith. We often conflate the concepts of evangelizing and proselytizing, assuming that if we are sent out to share the gospel, and that if we have not proselytized successfully, we have failed in evangelizing. But Paul knows that it's not our job to convert people to the faith. It's not our job to bring people to Jesus. Jesus is here, not just in this building, but inhabiting the world, less than an arm's length away from any of us. And so Paul starts by saying, I see how incredibly devout you are. He shows love and solidarity with his fellow humans who believe in different gods than he does. And then he says, let me tell you about the God I know. And using the words of their culture, quoting their own philosophers, their own poets, he does so. Some of my favorite episodes of Somebody Feed Phil are the ones where he has an encounter with the divine. Phil is Jewish, but not very observant, as he certainly has no problem eating pork or seafood. And so to see him singing along at the end of a service in a historically black Baptist church in Chicago, or gathering with Muslims in Marrakesh for the evening prayer during Ramadan, joining them in prayers to Allah, and then witnessing their breaking of the fast, reveals some sense of the holy that is always at our fingertips, even if it's not our expression of the holy. That's what Phil and Paul both do so well. They both enter into another culture wholeheartedly, apostles on their various evangelical missions. Phil is sent to spread the good news of the beauty of the world, the distinctness of cultures in different cities, different countries, and how those distinct cultures, those distinct cuisines strengthen us in our common humanity. At heart, Phil is a humanist. He believes that all people everywhere have the ability and should have the right to strive to reach their full potential. Paul starts where Phil ends, with the belief that our distinct cultures strengthen us in our common humanity, and then he builds from there. He speaks in ways his audience can understand to spread the good news of the God he believes in, the Christ who was born and spent his life in ministry and was crucified and resurrected, and now has become the one in whom we live and move and have our being. You're already seeking, Paul says. You have all of these temples around you, including this shrine to an unknown God. Let me tell you more about what you already know. Let me help you find the thing you are looking for. Let me describe it in a different way so that maybe, just maybe, one or two or a half dozen of you might find that this is the final piece of the puzzle. The thing that puts the whole picture together for you. The last half step that allows you to finally grasp what you've been reaching for. If not today, then maybe next week, or next year, or 20 years from now. Because what Paul and Phil both know is that it's not about Paul. It's not about Phil. Sure, they may have the famous names. They may be the reason why people tune in, why people pay attention when they say something, but they both know that they're just the conduit for the sacred. They're just the vessel that's being filled up and tipped out over and over again with the divine communion shared with those whom they encounter. That's what evangelism is. It's the humility to walk into a space, whether it's a room or a city, whether we know the culture or not, and not assume that we are bringing God with us. Because God was there before we walked in and will be there long after we walk out. It's the recognition of the culture that exists, whether it's our own culture or not. And it's the recognition that that culture honors the divine, however they honor it, whether they're Christian or Jewish or Muslim or Navajo or Hindu or Buddhist. It's not up to us to tell them they're right or wrong. If they are devout, it's up to us to recognize and honor that and enter into conversation. Tell me about your practices. Can I tell you about mine? When we engage in real evangelism, we are likely to find that we are changed at least as much as the other person. Because when we hear what someone else has to say about Jesus or about their experience of the divine, we are likely to find that suddenly God doesn't fit quite so neatly into the box we had put them in. And we may find that we begin to embody our faith in new and different ways. And isn't that what the good news is all about? Transforming us. Amen.